Who better on this day of days to go through the Sunday newspapers than Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary and my fellow GB News presenter. He is, of course, on air at 11. He's doing a double shift with us this morning. And, by the way, it's his birthday. Many happy returns
thank you
to
very
Michael.
much indeed. And good morning, Camilla.
You're the perfect person to comment on the idea of bringing back national service. It's all over the front pages. I think the Mail on Sunday got the scoop initially because the Prime Minister has written an opinion piece for them saying that he would be happy to see his own two daughters do their national service. Is this a good idea, Michael?
I think the announcement has brought the electoral campaign alive. It's the most interesting thing that has happened so far. I think the idea has lots to recommend it. It has a number of merits. The arguments that the Prime Minister indeed is making, that it brings society together, that it's a way also of adding to our resilience as a country. However, the way in which this policy has been produced worries me very much indeed. That is to say, I very much doubt whether it's been thought through. I very much doubt whether the armed services and all the charities that need to be involved have been consulted and are on board. It represents an increase in public expenditure, and that's very important because it puts the Conservatives on the back foot. Because on the whole, the Conservatives should be saying, we've got clear plans, we're the government. Now ask Labour how they're going to find the extra money.
Yes.
Now this reverses all that because now Labour can say, but the Conservatives are making promises which aren't funded. And the Conservatives are saying vaguely the $1.5 billion or $2 billion could be paid for by clamping down on tax avoidance. He won't have consulted Conservative members of Parliament or candidates who will now have to defend this policy on the doorstep, whether they like it or not. And one of the reasons they might not like it is it's another extension of the state. And Rishi Sunak seems to be absolutely in love with the state.
Yes.
You know, the party that brought us lockdown and furlough and the ban on smoking, which has not been legislated, as it turns out.
Although Labour says they will reintroduce it because they love big state, let's be honest.
But do they love it more than Rishi Sunak? I mean, here's Rishi Sunak now saying that all sons and daughters around 18 should be doing some element of national service. I mean, if the idea had been debated over the last couple of years and the case had been made for it and the groundwork had been laid, it might be a terrific policy. In these circumstances, I think it's going to be a lot of trouble for the Tories.
Does it look a little bit desperate? Does it look as if they've got into a room and thought, right, what can we do to try and convince people watching GB News who might be flirting with the idea of voting for reform to come back to us? There is a refrain, bring back national service. We've all heard it. Incidentally, I just checked the Telegraph website earlier before we came on, and we put an online poll up there, and 8,000 are in favour and 2,000 are against. So it might well appeal to righties.
That is interesting, but it depends which sort of righty you are, because if you're the sort of righty, as I am, who cares about public spending, you might be quite suspicious of it. And if you're worried about how big the state is, as I am, you might be quite suspicious of it.
Yeah.
So I'm not at all sure that it will, in the end, unite GB News viewers. And I'm not at all clear that it's going to unite the Conservative Party.
Shall we go back to Wednesday and talk about Sunak's soggy start? Where were you when you heard the news, Michael?
I was in the dentist, I think.
Were you? At 2:30. Sorry, pardon the bad cracker joke. You were in the dentist. Presumably, did you feel more pain when you emerged from the dentist and saw this announcement for the Tory party?
Well, of course, like so many people, I thought, how could the thing have been so catastrophically mismanaged?
Yeah.
How could you possibly stick a Prime Minister out in a rainstorm?
He's not a fair weather politician, he pointed out afterwards.
However, also with all the noise, I mean, we've more or less lost control of the streets of London, so there's bound to be a megaphone out there.
To be fair, we all know, don't we? Anyone that has ever gone into Westminster on a Wednesday knows that Stop Brexit man Steve Bray is there with a loudspeaker, a loudhailer, a megaphone.
And even if you weren't, because for about 2 hours, people pretty much knew there was going to be an announcement. There was time for anyone with a megaphone to get there.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I mean, you know, there is an interior to Number 10. It has an inside as well as an outside. They could have been
Well, they've spent millions on that COVID briefing room. Why not do it in there?
They could have done it from the House of Commons. They could have hired the Methodist Hall.
He said he wanted to be a traditionalist, and I think that's interesting. There's a bit of a tale of two stories going on in the papers today, because you've got the Sunday Express saying 5 reasons why it was a good idea to call the election when he did.
Yes.
Then you've got the Observer quite predictably sort of saying the whole thing's been a gaffe-prone mess from start to finish.
So the Express is doing its best to put the good spin on this. But at least 2 of its reasons are very unheroic. There's no stopping the boats, so they're going to be arriving all summer.
Yes.
So we might as well have the election before the numbers get even worse than they are. And the other is that it's not at all clear that the economy is going to get better, it might get worse. So those 2 reasons as to why he's done the right thing in calling the election are, as I would describe them, very unheroic reasons. I think the only one of the reasons listed by the Express that I give any credence to, and you've touched on it a moment ago, is that I think it has been quite disruptive to reform.
Yes.
Now, it's very interesting you're going to be speaking to Nigel Farage. I wonder what's going on there, but a lot of Conservative candidates will now be extremely relieved that Farage is not standing.
Well, I'm going to ask Nigel, does he appreciate that he's handed a gift to Rishi Sunak in not standing? Isn't there some sense in this positioning of Rishi Sunak being quite presidential? One of the reasons he said himself why he stood in Downing Street is because he's a traditionalist and he's the Prime Minister, and that's the way the Prime Minister does things. He didn't want to be indoors because when you address the public, you address them from the Downing Street podium. OK, fair point. So the Conservatives now are very much making this a blues versus red punch-up between safer with Sunak and in peril with Starmer. Let's be honest, Starmer never expected to be in this position. He came in thinking he was Neil Kinnock, having to be an opposition leader facing an 80-seat majority with Boris Johnson, rampaging around the country, campaigning and doing the thing that Boris does.
I don't know of any tradition that dictates you have to stand outside rather than inside Downing Street. I cannot imagine Margaret Thatcher standing there looking drowned in the rain. Can you? It simply...
Perish the thought,
No,
Michael.
it simply would not have happened. However, I mean, it is about time we talked about Starmer. I don't think he's had a great campaign so far either, by any means. He's finding it very hard to answer questions. He's extremely vague. And listening to listener and viewer feedback from shows that he's been on, a lot of people are saying this man has no answers to any of the questions. Now, I thought the Conservative campaign would be about 6 weeks of exposing Starmer's uncertainty and lack of clarity. But of course, by introducing the national service idea, we're now going to have at least a week of focus on that. And that means a week that we don't focus on whether Starmer has any answers. So I'm not sure, you see, whether the national service announcement doesn't act against the campaign strategy.
Well, also, I agree that the strongest campaign strategy is to say they don't have a plan, he's floundering, he's acting like he's a professor of politics, sort of theorising what he might come up with in the manifesto without actually nailing his colours to the mast. And, he's flip-flopped more than a Havaianas shop. But at the same time, this is going to be one of many policy drops. I was told by somebody at Downing Street yesterday, national service is just the beginning. We've got a whole week or two planned of dropping these policy bombshells.
Well, a bombshell is quite a good metaphor because it's not quite clear whom they injure most. I mean, if they're going to be more policy announcements that have not been consulted with the Tory party, you imagine now you're a candidate on the doorstep.
Yes.
You may be someone who is a member of Parliament, or you may be doing it for the first time. But you now have to defend this policy of introducing national service. Well, in no way were you consulted about it, and you don't know the details. And goodness knows how strong the details are. I mean, is someone from the armed forces going to say, we absolutely welcome this, is a terrific idea? I suppose they'll have to be careful what they say because we're doing an election campaign. But as we know, the armed forces aren't very keen on this sort of thing, because they feel that they're getting involved in a kind of social service, because putting someone in for a year, particularly if they're not particularly willing, does not, at the other end, produce a particularly good soldier. But it may, by the way, produce a better human being. I'm absolutely prepared to believe that.
But we might not get military chiefs speaking out against it, but you're a former Defence Secretary. You've suggested it's not the wisest of plans. I think Michael Fallon in the past has questioned the wisdom of national service, making the point that the armed forces have got a job on their hands to make sure that they're training the recruits that are willingly there, let alone people who are sort of forced into it.
Well, I think I could be persuaded if long enough were given and, if the case had been set out and had been argued over a period of time, possibly I would be persuadable, because I do understand that in the present situation that we find ourselves with a very aggressive Russia, that to have an increasing cadre of people with some experience of the military might be quite useful. I mean, it begins to constitute a bit more of a reserve. So whilst I don't think they'll probably be brilliant soldiers by the end of a year, if on the other hand you needed them at some other point, they would have some experience. So I go back to my very first point. I don't say the idea is without merit. I think it has quite strong merits, but the way in which it's been produced worries me very much.
Should we talk about Portillo moments?
Yes.
Do we mind saying... Are you happy with me saying that there are some Tory MPs that appear to have jumped ship because they feared they may have a Portillo moment?
Yes.
And this is the idea of sort of the ousting of a big beast on election night, which is something you personally experienced. This is a suspicion with Michael Gove deciding he's going to stand down in Surrey Heath, where, a little bit like Jeremy Hunt, he's got the Liberal Democrats breathing down his neck. Is that why you think he's done it, Michael?
I think it's very, very possible. But I also say another word, and it's just about courtesy. Members of Parliament got elected because they have constituency associations that have worked very hard for them and given them tremendous loyalty. I think it is the most profound discourtesy to give up your seat when the election is announced. If you want to leave, you should give 6 months or 12 months notice. These poor constituencies now are scrabbling around to find candidates. The ones that are won, in this case by the Conservatives, will they be certain that the candidate they've chosen is of quality? Will they have had time to do background checks and all this sort of thing?
Yes.
But I mean, I think members of Parliament who leave at the last moment like this are using their constituencies like a public convenience. I really do. I think it's so discourteous.
You're really angry about it.
I really am angry about it.
But you were there in 97. You have to stand up. You have to face the music. If you lose and you become this kind of totem for the failure of your own party, you've got to own it. Life continues. Life goes on. You think it's lacking in courage?
To give up the seat?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what Michael's... I don't think there's any lack in courage in deciding that you want to leave Parliament. I just think, as a matter of courtesy, you've got to make the announcement at the right time.
Yes.
I mean, it seems so ungrateful to all the people who worked for you for all these years just to say, oh, well, I'm off now. And I don't care what kind of stew you're left in, trying to find a decent
Also,
candidate.
on a macro level, because the record now has been beaten, so in 97, 75... Tory MPs announced that they weren't standing. It's now at 78. And it's not just Gove. Let's be honest, Andrea Leadsom and others have also thrown in the towel. Joe Churchill.
At the last minute.
Greg Clark, former business secretary. But it shows a complete lack of confidence in the Tories' election strategy and indeed Rishi Sunak as well.
Well, we hear that Michael Gove congratulated the Prime Minister, urged the Prime Minister to take this decision, said it was bold, blah, blah, blah. But apparently not bold enough to be part of the team during the election and not bold enough to be a candidate at the election. So I think that doesn't look very good. I just want to make a rather pedantic point. I think a Portillo moment is a big beast losing his or her seat. That was not predicted. Yes,
true. That's very true.
At the moment,
it was a bolt from the blue for you.
We're predicting it could be Penny Mordaunt. We're predicting it could be Kami Badenoch, etc., etc. But I think for it to be a Portillo moment, it's someone that was never thought about. I mean, that would have to be what? Rishi Sunak?
Perished the thought.